computer?
In progress.
Okay. Okay. All righty. Hello, everybody. My name is Walisha Wilson. Thank you so very much for joining us here at New Life Second Chance Outreach. The purpose of this program is, let me do it like this.
But I don't hear them. And I just, let me see.
You can't hear?
I do. I hear now. Yes.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yes.
All right.
I'll call you back.
Okay. Let me see. And if you can, if everybody please mute yourselves.
Okay. Mute yourself.
Thank you for choosing to join us for our last event of Georgia Reentry Awareness Month. Special thanks to my friend Harold Trulier and Healing Communities USA for partnering with us on this event, as well as a special panel guest for today for blessing us with your expertise on the issues of the faith community's role in reentry. The mission of New Life Second Chance Outreach is to reduce crime and recidivism by equipping, empowering, and restoring hope to socially and economically disadvantaged individuals who are impacted by a criminal record through workforce development and job readiness training so that they may become productive and self-sufficient individuals. Andrea, can you drop the chat to the website? Healing Communities is a faith-based program for individuals and their families who are impacted by a criminal record and by mass incarceration. It is a social capital framework for individuals and their families that is distinct form of ministry to men and women returning home from or at risk of incarceration, their families, and the larger community. Healing Communities challenges congregations to become stations of hope for those persons affected by the system through the mobilization of existing resources within the congregation, specifically the formal and informal networks. It offers 8 basic components of action for congregations that are built upon existing strengths, all performed within the existing ministry structure of the church. As one church official noted in reviewing the concept, any church can do this and every church should do this. I will drop those resources in the chat later. Why is this conversation necessary? This conversation is necessary because today, as a person of faith myself and as a Christian and as a person who has been put out of not 1, not 2, but 3 churches because of my felony conviction, this is a plea to ask the faith community to put that faith into action. When a person is released by the state, the relationship that we have with the state is one that's basically composed of just monitoring versus, via parole and probation. Corrections mentality isn't one that works well with reentry because corrections, it requires a different type of, like a philosophical and a spiritual shift. Corrections officers are indoctrinated and trained to be adversarial, have adversarial relationships with us as we're released. So therefore, they're not really working with us on the relationships that we need outside of prison. So at the point of release, we are no longer in their care, and reentry is not the focal point for what the state does with us. Their focal point is to supervise and correct. But they're not unable to provide social integration and spiritual guidance that we need. But the faith community and the places of worship, they can. However, we're often not welcome there. There is power in forgiveness and giving second chances. Just as Moses, Paul, David, and Zacchaeus were forgiven, so should we and your neighbor. Our criminal record does not define the person who God has ordained us to be. Just as Jesus had a purpose for a murderer named David, a prostitute named Rahab, a drunk named Noah, a persecutor named Paul, and even gave eternal life to a thief on a cross, he has a purpose for our lives too. Why? Because he specializes in using flawed people to bring forth his message. And there is nothing like a testimony of one about going from a mess to a masterpiece. So if God can still use all of those broken crayons, why can't the faith community? We are not accepted into the faith community. Why are we not accepted into the faith community? Why are we being banned from and asked to leave places that we come to in the first place, not to be judged, to be redeemed, and to be included? How can people stand in pulpits and read scriptures that talk about the great work of Moses and Paul, but then turn away Robert, Pookie, and Brandon? Moses murdered a man and became a fugitive, and Paul presided over the stoning of Stephen, the first Christian martyr. And had they lived today, and if they were living today, they'd be serving life sentences. So why does the faith community accept them and their redemption, but not ours? Aren't we the same broken crayons as they were? Therefore, faith communities play a substantial role in helping formerly incarcerated people return to society, rebuild relationships, overcome old behaviors, and deepen our faith commitment. Right now, I'm going to, before I introduce the panelists and my co-moderator, when he gets here, we'll engage with, before he engages with the panel at this point, I'm gonna take 2 minutes to show you all a video that my
Harold
friend
is here.
Oh, he's here, okay, that he talked about. So I'm gonna go ahead and get prepared for that. But before I do that, I am going to drop this chat. And then we're gonna get this started. Let's see. Where is we at? Here we go. Here we go. Okay, everybody can see the screen. And I'm gonna make sure we optimize, share the sound, and optimize the video clip. I always love to see that clip. Definitely powerful because it is so much truth in it, so much truth. So right now we're going to go ahead and do our introduction of our panelists. We will have Q&A at around 4:30 because Reverend Dr. John Vaughn has to leave early. When we do jump into the actual questions, he'll do his question first. And if anybody has a question for him, we'll allow 1 to 2 questions for him since he won't be here during Q&A, but everybody else's, the questions will wait until the end. So we're going to start with, and I apologize. I know most people who do see me do these, I always have a thing that shows their pictures and all this goody stuff in it, but y'all, it's been a challenge. It's been challenging, so I'll just read it out. Reverend John Vaughn, wave your hand, Reverend Vaughn, so they know who you are, serves as the executive pastor of the historic Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta, Georgia, which is also my church. Works closely with the church's senior pastor and newest United States Senator, Reverend Dr. Warfield Warnock, in managing the overall vision, ministries, and operations of this iconic international congregation. Known as America's Freedom Church and the spiritual home of the Reverend Martin Luther King Sr. and Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Ebenezer remains at the forefront of the fight for social justice and community transformation while remaining committed to individual growth and discipleship. Previously, Reverend Vaughn served for almost 10 years as the Executive Vice President at Auburn Theological Seminary. Auburn is a national leadership development and research institute that equips leaders of faith and moral courage for multi-faith movements for justice. Reverend Vaughn is an ordained minister in the American Baptist Churches, received his undergraduate degree from Holy Cross College in Worcester, Massachusetts, his Master of Divinity from the Pacific School of Religion in Berkeley, and in May 2021, his Doctor of Ministry from Drew Theological School. He's married to the Reverend Dr. P. Kimberly Jordan, an ordained minister in the United Church of Christ, who serves as the Associate Director of Educational Design at Wabash Center for Teaching and Learning in Theology, and they are the proud parents of 2 teenage sons. Billy Michael Honor, raise your hand, Billy, is a public scholar and civic organizer whose progressive and compelling insights have made him a sought-after lecturer and social commentator. Billy is currently the Religion and Racial Justice Fellow with the Aspen Institute's Inclusive America Project. In this role, Billy researches, writes, convenes conversations about the importance of religious pluralism in the fight for racial equity and justice. Prior to joining Aspen, Billy was the director of faith organizing for the New Georgia Project, which is a respected civic engagement and civil rights organization founded by the noted politician Stacey Abrams. In this position, Billy mobilized faith communities to break the chains of injustice through organized civic engagement. While at New Georgia Project, his innovative campaigns and activism were celebrated and written about by many media outlets and recognized for being one of the promising contemporary movements of public faith witness. As a result, the Center for American Progress named him as one of the 20 faith leaders in the nation to watch in 2020. In recognition of his community organizing and moral witness work, the Atlanta Magazine has named Billy one of 500 most powerful people in Atlanta for 2021. He holds a Bachelor's of Arts in Biblical Education with honors from Beulah Heights Christian University in Atlanta, a Master of Divinity degree from Johnson C. Smith Seminary of the Interdenominational Theological Center in Atlanta, where he graduated top of his class, and he's completed advanced studies, Master's of Theology degree with honors from Emory University's Candler School of Theology. He has also been an adjunct professor of religious studies and guest lecturer at various theological institutions. He currently lives in Atlanta, Georgia, and enjoys traveling and restaurant hopping. And according to Facebook, he just recently had a little one, a very small little one, like a couple of days ago. So congrats on that. Is Reverend Sandra here yet? Okay. We'll still read the bio just in case she comes in. Rabbi Lydia Medwin, Rabbi wave your hand, was ordained in the Los Angeles campus of HUC in May 2010. While there, she received a Master's of Hebrew Letters and a Master in Jewish education from the Rhea Hirsch School. She had formative experiences traveling El Salvador with other student rabbis from across denominations with American Jewish World Service, leading UCLA Hillel students on service trips to the Appalachian Mountains and Yosemite, and engaging in an intensive course on community organizing. She is a native of Memphis, Tennessee, where she attended the University of Texas in Austin and Hebrew University for undergraduate studies, earning degrees in Middle Eastern Studies and honors in humanities. Between undergraduate and graduate studies, she's worked as the education director for a synagogue in Jackson, Mississippi, and traveled to places such as Africa, Peru, and Greece. While in rabbinic school, Lydia met her husband, Dan Medwin, and their 3 children are thrilled to be a part of the temple community. She is a co-author with Dr. Ron Wolfson and Rabbi Nicole Auerbach of the Relational Judaism Handbook, How to Create a Relational Engagement Campaign to Build and Deepen Relationships in Your Community. Purpose and people are at the center of what Rabbi Medwin believes a synagogue community should be about. She's excited to learn and create with us. Bill Paul, wave your hand, Bill, attended Florida State University and is a veteran of the U.S. Navy. He is retired after 35 years as a sales manager with Hubble Incorporated. Bill has served on the board of directors for a North Georgia Fellowship of Christian Athletes Association and currently serves as an elder at a Baptist church in Ellijay, Georgia. Bill has been married to his wife for 38 years. He's a father of 7 children, a grandfather, and a great-grandfather. Let's do Miss Sandra. Dr. Sandra Anderson has a true mission and passion to reach the incarcerated. Although she was not raised in a Christian environment, God had plans for her life. He saved her while she was serving a 3-year prison sentence in 1998. He transformed her life. The transformation of her life gives evidence that her life has truly been touched by God. Sandra possesses an in-depth understanding of scripture and is able to effectively exegete the meaning of biblical text had for its original hearers. This knowledge, combined with her various teaching methods, make the word applicable to the people of this time and culture. Dr. Anderson is a magna cum laude graduate with a bachelor's degree in biblical studies, a cum laude graduate with a master's degree in biblical studies, and a magna cum laude graduate with a Master of Divinities degree from Beacon University. She also completed her doctoral studies at Liberty University in Lynchburg and was ordained in 2017. She has served as a keynote speaker for Heartbound Ministries for over a decade and presently serves as the pastor of Second Chance Aftercare Ministry. Now, finally, Dr. Harold Dean Trulia is an ordained American Baptist minister, and that is who you saw in that 2-piece YouTube video, where he's also an immediate past president of the Gamma of DC chapter of Phi Beta Kappa. He is director of the Healing Communities Prison Ministry and Prisoner Reentry Project of the Philadelphia Leadership Foundation. Designed by the Annie E. Casey Foundation, Healing Communities has been implemented in over 25 sites nationally in partnership with such organizations as the Progressive National Baptist Convention, the General Board of Church and Society of the Methodist Church, and the D Free Ministry. Dr. Trulia is one of the pastoral staff of Praise and Glory Tabernacle in Southwest Philadelphia and also serves as a fellow at the Center for Public Justice in Washington, D.C. He has taught religion, public policy, and community studies in several institutions, including Yale, the University of Southern California, Hartford Seminary, Eastern University, and Vanderbilt. He currently teaches at Howard University, and he is an author of several pieces. Thank you all so very much for joining us right now. Thank you so very much. And from this point on, we will, I'll hand it over to Harold. And before we go on, before Harold starts with asking the questions, I know we are so used to using certain terms, and I know Harold used it in that video, but that was old. But we want to make sure we're also cognizant of the terms that we are using. We no longer use or prefer the terms inmates, prisoners, ex-con, convict. We are formerly incarcerated people, justice involved people, returning citizens, person with a disability. However, we want to use person-centered language. So I know it's very hard to understand, but you know what? We got over terms being called the N-word, being called colored, to being African-American, to being Black. So it takes some use to, but we need to learn. We want everybody to learn how to use these words. And that's part of reentry, of accepting people in, is to see them as human, which is what we are when we come back. And I get that all the time where people be like, oh, you're different, Wallace. You ain't that kind of felon. But I was in prison just like everybody else. Doc was in prison just like everybody else. So you never know what people's stories are, but we are human first. So we just want to remind that when everybody does that Q&A, and also when we're talking, to try to avoid that kind of language, we want to use person-centered language. Me personally, I'm Walisha first. I'm a Christian. But if you just have to, if you just need to know that, I do prefer formerly incarcerated person. I don't mind ex-offender. Call me whatever you want to call me. I'm hungry right now. Just don't call me an ex-con or a convict. All righty. So we're going to go on with Harold. He's going to take it. First question. You got to unmute yourself. There you go.
All right, everyone can hear me?
Yes.
God bless you. It's good to see everyone. Got some familiar faces in the audience, and spouses of familiar people too. So I'm gonna have to be on my best behavior. Harold Dean Trulier, 1000268 was my number at George W. Hill Correctional Facility. So I have a nickel in this quarter, just like rest of us here today. Whether you are formerly incarcerated or whether you are close to somebody, one of the things that we do at the Healing Communities Ministry is we help congregations reach people who are coming home by identifying the family members that are left behind in our churches. And so for me to be able to moderate this panel, English persons, several of whom I've worked with, I was on a panel with Billy Honor a couple of years ago at Ebenezer, and of course, John Vaughn, and others of you that I've worked with. And our Healing Communities representative for Georgia is on this call, I believe, Joanne Cash. I saw Joanne a little while ago. So it's good to be with familiar people and talk about a familiar subject that we can expand to those that are unfamiliar. We're going to start with Reverend Dr. John Vaughn and ask Reverend Vaughn what Ebenezer, his church, is currently doing to advocate for social justice issues and ending mass incarceration. And how does supporting people coming home from prison, returning citizens, come into play at Ebenezer? Did you unmute Reverend Vaughn, Walisa?
No, is he still on here?
Okay, here he is. He's
good.
good.
Now I've been unmuted. Yep. No, I'm good. I'm good now. I'm good. Thank you, Andrea. Brother Trulier, it's great to see you again, and good to see a lot of the familiar faces here. So, so Ebenezer has two of the things that Ebenezer has been very active in over the last number of years has been an annual bailout, where we have been bailing folks out on Juneteenth as a way to draw attention to the issues of the challenges of bail, and as a way to advocate for the abolition of bail within Georgia, and to understand and educate people that this is a wealth-based system. And so we bail people out. We do that every year as part of Juneteenth, and we collaborate with others, including our good friends at the temple, so Rabbi Lydia Medwin, and others. The other thing that we've been doing for a handful of years now has been record restrictions, expungements. And once again, the temple and others have been really, and Georgia Justice have been really great partners, I think, in this work. And we do that as a way to draw attention to, what expungements can actually do for people's lives, and the sense of being able to allow folks to then be able to apply for particular jobs they weren't able to apply for, able to adopt family members. It's just a number of things in terms of that it opens up. And we have been advocating at the state level for legislation that would provide more automatic expungements. We're grateful for the Solicitor General's office, Keith Gamage, as really a central partner who works with us. With our good friends at the Temple, and then Auburn Seminary, and now Odyssey Impact out of New York. We have helped house and found the Multi-Faith Initiative to End Mass Incarceration. And this is an effort that really is focused on increasing the number of congregations engaged around this work. It is shifting the narrative around how we talk about this, and also changing the theology, and also to increase our engagement around policy work. And so we're doing this in Georgia, but also in 5 other regions, including New York, Wisconsin, Arkansas, Texas, and Southern California. And so we are incarceration initiative is www. And so really grateful for a number of the folks, Reverend Billy, who was part of the team that co-led and co-planned our conference in 2019. And then we're looking to do another conference. We're thinking either 2022 or early 2023. So certainly be on the watch out for that. But the last thing I'll say is that, you know, we have to be in this fight if we care about people, if we care about second chances, third chances. I mean, we are the people of a second chance. And if we as faith communities can't get behind that, then, you know, I think we need to just fold up our tents and just go on and just go on and not be around. Because this is, to me, is really the core, at least in the Christian community, is really the core of the gospel for us in terms of the importance of second chances and third chances and opportunities. And everybody should have opportunities to thrive and to be there, to live their fullest lives. So I'll end there, and certainly glad to field any questions. I'd even invite my colleague, I know Lydia, you'll talk a little later, but if Rabbi Lydia or Reverend Billy, I see Kate Baccia on the line, you know, folks who'd love to chime in, you're welcome to do so.
And I did drop all the information in the chat as well, as for them also to see about the conference and the Odyssey website for the EMI conference. I did drop all that in chat.
That's great. And I'm sorry that I will duck out a little before 4:30. Our youngest son is a musical theater kid. And I found out that the time for his performance today is 5 o'clock. So I need to be there and I need to be present. So when I duck out, that's essentially what has happened. So.
That's okay. It seems like we're good to go. I don't think anybody had any questions. But we will send your whatever information that you want people that can reach you. If you want to put that in the chat before you go, that way it can go in the post email. And if anybody has any questions, they can reach you at that. And we're going to go ahead and go with the next question. Thank you so much, Dr. Vine, Reverend Vine.
I'm going to unmute everyone so we don't run into this problem again. But please, when I unmute, please make sure that you mute yourself.
Okay, I'm unmuted now. The next question is for Billy Honor, and we're asking.
I have before that Range Rover and before that Mercedes, and I paid for it. I guess I should call them again, huh?
Yeah, you might want to call them again, Shantae, and mute yourself at the same time.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm at the place trying to order my food.
I thought you were trying to order a Mercedes.
No, I said I ordered before all of them. All right.
I was going to say two. Okay, for Billy Honor, people of faith have always been at the forefront of the equality movements, from fighting for racial justice in America to the Quakers working as abolitionists to help free enslaved Africans on the Underground Railroad, to Martin Luther King of Ebenezer Church and multi-faith communities fighting for civil rights during the civil rights movement. However, in recent times, the faith community has taken a back seat, if not downright refused to get involved in many social justice issues. Why do you think there is a lack of boldness or hesitancy on the part of faith community to get involved in social justice issues as we have in the past? Someone needs to unmute Billy.
He's
Thank you.
unmuted.
All right, appreciate that. Glad to be with everyone. Really glad to be a part of this conversation. It's exceptionally important, and very glad to be here with so many people of goodwill and friends who I've worked with. As I call her, my rabbi, Lydia Medwin, and of course the good Reverend John Vaughn and Dr. Harold. Always good to see you. Thank you for your light in the midst of us, dear brother, and glad to meet Mr. Paul. But thank you for the question. I think, first of all, I want to complicate the question a bit by saying that there are a lot of faith communities that are doing great work. You just heard from one of them, right? About Ebenezer. So it's not all faith communities. The Temple is doing wonderful work, as you've heard. I could name many more. Many of us have worked with congregations. And so the message is getting across. All is not lost. There are congregations that are involved in doing the work that we all feel should be a part of ministry, which is, for me, it's how it is we provide a place of restoration, right? A place where it is people can find their way to a more full and whole life after having committed the so-called offense. As Reverend Vaughn said, that should be the core of what we do, right, in terms of ministries. But there are, of course, a lot of ministries that haven't gotten the message yet. And the question is why? Why? And for me, I think it's a number of things. I'll just lift up a couple of them. One is that, unfortunately, I think we live under the illusion that just because congregations name the name of God or their deity, whatever that is, that those who show up have fully realized and understand everything that it means to represent that deity, meaning that we assume that churches are panaceas of ethics and morality, and they are not. You know, same is true for temples, synagogues, and mosques. The same people from the community populate these places, and they bring all of their biases, preconceived notions, growing edges are all present in these congregations, and people are trying to work through them. And so first thing we should understand is that congregations are made up of people, flawed people, right? With flawed perceptions about community, about what it means to restore one who has been in a situation where they're a returning citizen. And so that's the first thing I'll say. The second thing I'll say is that there's a sort of politics of respectability that you see. In other words, that in a lot of our religious traditions, we like to see ourselves as righteous based upon how socially respectable we are. And a lot of our congregations are more rooted in a sort of respectability, a sort of status seeking. Some of them just outright capitalist social mobility, right? All of that is a part of the gospel that many of our congregations are rooted in. And when that is the case, you're going to look down on other individuals who you see who are not ascending up the ladder. And that doesn't just apply to formerly incarcerated citizens. There are a number of different ways that people get othered, right? And made to feel that they cannot be a part of certain congregations because they don't occupy a certain status. And so I think that's part of it. And then the last thing I'll say is that we also just have some churches have bad theology. Some temples and synagogues and mosques just have bad theology, right? And bad theologies that are rooted in narratives of punishment. I think we cannot underestimate how much our faith traditions have helped to further the social cause of punishment for people who do things that we consider to be an offense. And a lot of it has to do with these holy books, these so-called holy books of ours that are also have lots of ways you can use these scriptures to justify various different forms of punishment and theologies of punishment. And so a lot of our so-called faith leaders actually are apostles of punishment, as I like to call them sometimes, who believe that punishment is somehow actually leads to righteousness. And so we have to be careful in the ways in which we just allow for different things that are said to shape the people in our congregations around these ideas of how people are punished for the things that they've done, so-called punishment, and not enough on righteousness. And so I think those are the three things I would say.
All right, great, thank you. Is Reverend Anderson with us yet? If not, then I'll just move on to Rabbi Lydia. How critical is multi-faith organizing in today's efforts for racial equality and justice? And why should communities of faith across the board be involved in issues that concern mass incarceration and prisoner reentry?
Thank you. Dr. Trulier, it is great to meet you. I've heard so much about you from all of my colleagues here. So I want to start with that and also say hey to all of my soul travelers that I know here, and all of you who I know bring your fullest hearts into this work, as we all do. You know, as I was thinking about this question, 3 P's came to mind. 3 words that start with P. Everyone loves a good alliteration, right? Perspective, people, and power. And so when we're thinking about why we should be doing this work in multi-faith settings, the first is about perspective. We need all different kinds of perspectives in order to do this work well, to uncover new possibilities. We cannot create what we cannot imagine, and having different perspectives allows us into different kinds of imagination. So for instance, I'm thinking about in the Jewish tradition, in order to prosecute somebody for like in a capital case, the prosecutors must provide 2 witnesses. Those are people who are unrelated to anybody else in the trial, and adults of a certain age, and so on and so forth. They have to have warned the person before they were about to commit the crime that what they were going to do is illegal. The person then had to confirm, I hear you, that what I'm about to do is illegal. And only after that is the person even like able to be brought before the judges. And if a judge, if a group of, there's never one judge that prosecutes a criminal case, has to be at least 3, in some cases 9, in capital cases, 72 judges, and they have to be anonymous. I mean, I'm sorry, not anonymous. They have to all agree with one another. I'm sure there's the word that's slipping my mind, but you see what I'm saying? Like having this different kind of perspective offers us different possibilities. The second is people. We have to, when we work in multi-faith settings, we get the opportunity to frankly fall in love with other people, right? Fall in love with their spirits, fall in love with their brilliance, their perspectives, their passion that they bring to this work. And there's nothing that will make you want to fight harder than if somebody that you love gets hurt, or someone you love says, hey, I need your help. And so when we do this in interfaith settings, we get to just, we get to fall in love with other kinds of people. We get to see that they are made B'Tselem Elohim, in the image of God. Lastly, this sense of power. We know that change only comes when there's organized people, organized power, and as Reverend Vaughn likes to remind me, organized storytelling or sort of social media power, right? This narrative change that we get to create together. And so when we are working, if we want to get anything accomplished politically, if we want to see the world change on a socio-political level, we got to get ourselves organized around some power in order to make that change. And the multi-faith community is an incredible way to do it. None of us can do this work alone. We have to be coming together to do it. And then, you know, as for your second question there, I'm really thinking a lot about what Billy just said about what the ways in which so many of our faiths really do have, you know, authentically inside of them, theologies of punishment. That for some reason, we believe that through punishment, we can sort of purify ourselves or become more holy or righteous. But the best parts of our religion, I think, the most subversive parts, the most countercultural parts right now, are actually the parts that speak to mercy and compassion and justice in the face of that hard-heartedness. And so I'm thinking right now about the ways in which our traditions can create a vision for a new way of doing things. Like, what if we brought to this world in which people do step off the track sometimes, right? People do things that are wrong. What if we brought them a full force of heart-centered care that saw them as whole people, and sought to actually restore them to all of the ways that they wanted, all the goals that they might have had at some point, all the things they wanted to do in this world, all the people that they loved, all the communities they wanted to contribute to, and really worked hard to make that possible for them. How would that change their hearts, right? I think about, you, Dr. Trulio, you started off by citing your number. What if if people had to be incarcerated, which first of all, if we were to provide the right mental health care, the right housing help, food security help, legalizing drugs in a way, or offered drug treatment to people, folks would never end up in jail. But even if they had to go there at some point, what if they didn't have uniforms or had numbers? What if they got to just be a human being in this place where they were really trying to figure out how to reassess their lives and the ways they wanted to move forward after they got out? What if we didn't have parole because being in jail was the punishment? And so we didn't hang on to people forever. So, I think there's ways that the multi-faith community can help understand what it means to be restored into society and into families and communities that's untapped as yet. And I hope it gets to be tapped.
That's great. Thank you, Rabbi. Really appreciate your insight. I'm going to turn to Bill Paul, who is the managing director of Restore Georgia, which is a nonprofit working as a collective to change Georgia's sex offense laws, and he also advocates for the rights of individuals on the registries and their families. What can you say about the fears and stigmas that perpetuate the "not in my backyard" syndrome that churches exhibit when they eject people and run background checks on them? Can you comment on that? Because I know that's a hot issue in Georgia. While Lisa just brought that to my attention, we haven't started that in Virginia, but I'm watching now that I know about it. So, Bill, could you comment on that in Georgia for us, please?
Certainly. First of all, thank you very much for being invited to this distinguished group of individuals on this panel. I'm very impressed with this panel. Churches obviously should be a place of welcome sinners and offers God's forgiveness. Throughout the New Testament, there is a passage after passage that deals with compassion, forgiveness, and loving sinners. It's also essential that churches and the church leadership protects the flock. What's happening in many churches today that we're seeing throughout the country, but specifically in Georgia, is they're doing a great job of building safety and security teams, and they're building a safety plan to protect the church from all sorts of ills. But they're not willing in many cases to help a group of individuals who are also God's children and are needing assistance and help. And we're beginning to address this major issue specifically in houses of worship that are not welcoming those who committed a sexual offense. Current laws, because of resident restrictions, make it nearly impossible for registered citizens to find housing and employment. Add to the fact that returning citizens in many cases are not allowed to attend a place of worship. One example is a specific group of mega churches in the South that takes cards from their visitors, cards they fill out as when they guests of the church. They compare them to a list that's published by the GBI on registered sex offenders. In essence, they're performing a background check on everyone who walks through their doors. If they find a match, that person is not allowed to attend a service or an activity at any of their churches. There's no consideration of what the offense was, when it occurred. It's kind of the end of discussion. This is an issue that's extremely difficult. There are just no easy answers. I have, as mentioned earlier, I have children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren. Their safety and well-being to me is paramount in my life. But also consider there are nearly 24,000 people on the registry in the state of Georgia. When you factor in wives, husbands, mothers, fathers, children, there's at least on average 4 other people who are directly impacted by the registry. Now we're talking about 100,000 people in the state of Georgia alone who are being punished because of arbitrary decisions made by some in the religious community. So how do we find a workable and safe solution to this complex situation? My opinion is it's education, it's communication, and commitment. Just a few facts from a national level that church leaders need to be aware of. 3.5% of the registrants are reconvicted of another sexual offense within 3 years, whereas the 3-year recidivism rate for all other classes of crime is close to 50%. 95% of sexual offenses are committed by someone who is not on the registry. As I mentioned earlier, there are nearly 24,000 individuals on Georgia's sex offender registry. Less than 900 are actually classified as sexually dangerous predators. a major issue is that there's no delineation of crime in the public's mind, and also in the church's mind in many cases. A sex offender must be a pedophile or a child molester, when in reality, that's really very, very rare. I believe that church leadership needs to have an extensive and pointed dialogue with any individual who is on the registry and wants to become part of that church's congregation. Elders, deacons, safe team security members, they need to be aware of the individual circumstances. The registered person needs to commit to working with logical church requirements, such as children's areas may be considered off limits for him. And then the church can decide how best they wish to handle each individual situation. Recognize that all people in the registry are not the same.
Thank you. Thank you. We're going to turn it back over to Alisa. That is really important. And I hope that not only are we hearing the panelists, but also following the chat, because Walisa is putting a number of great resources up in the chat for us, including several that directly address what Bill Paul was telling us about. So please make sure you're paying attention to the chat as well. And Walisa, are you going to make the chat available to all of us afterward?
Yes. Also, anybody can also download the chat. If you're on your phone, there should be like 3 dots. So when you go to the chat, you're able to save the chat. And because I know people have been on all of these other past workshops we've done, and I said, I'm going to get you these post-event resources, but because this is the last week of July and I'm spending all day Saturday, you would have this stuff by Monday. So I will actually be emailing. So if you just don't feel like clicking on all these and open up all these windows, don't worry about it. I will make sure I send it to you. It might not be today or tomorrow, but you will get it before the week is out, because August is a little slowed down for me. But yeah, we will get it. And at some point we will upload this video to, please give me grace. We'll upload this video to YouTube along with the other ones that we did. But I also wanted to ask Harold a question, but before I got to that, I also sit on the board of directors of Restore Georgia, and I'm passionate about it. And I always get, why do you always got to say something about sex offense? Everything you do, because we work with individuals with criminal records, and that includes people on the registry. And what a lot of people do not realize, there are a lot of women on the registry. I'm telling you, had my mama been around right now, she would be charged on the registry, because several of the women that we've been working with, they have been putting them on the registry because their children are being molested at home. And according to the judge, no mother in their right mind does not know when their child is being molested, which is an absolute lie. I was molested for 10 years from the time I was 4 to 14 and never told my mom about it. So when people, that is the point, that when we say this, I've read a lot of these toolkits that we have, and people say, do this and do this. When people come in, you need to put them out, or you need to do this. But there was actually a research done that said 80% of church leaders and members have no problem welcoming people coming home on the registry. I think the biggest challenge is how to keep the church safe. Now, I have a problem with that language, because why do you feel like you need to keep somebody safe? Now, I understand there's insurance and all that stuff that goes, but one of the biggest questions, I actually facilitated a training with a church probably about a year ago, before I even got involved with Restore Georgia. And one of the things was, we want to put some kind of policy in place, because we serve a lot of homeless people, and a lot of people might be sex offenders. So we want to put something in place. And they thought it was weird, but I suggested to them, and I asked them out front, what do you do on Saturdays? And they said, what do you mean? What do we do on Saturdays? What are you doing here at church on Saturday? They said, the church is closed on Saturday. I said, so why not have separate services for folks on the registry? And they were like, so we could have been serving these people. Yeah, it was like, you could have, did you really make an effort to serve folks, as opposed to putting people out? So that's what I suggested to the church. You're not doing anything on a Saturday. If you know that there's a significant number of people who may be on the registry and you have a different interest to your church, why not have church services on Saturday for those folks? Why not be able to make it where it's only that entrance, where there's a bathroom that they can use without accessing the rest of the church? If you really want to make efforts, it can be done. And I think what it is people say, well, what do? We got a sex offender, we got to grab our children. For one, we need to educate ourselves that, like Bill said, not everybody is a pedophile, not everybody is a child molester. Over 65% of our children who are molested by people they already know. People that go to church with them, their parents, their friends, their school teachers. their cub leaders. It's people they already know. And to just imagine, I mean, when I got home, all I did was stand up and say, my name is Walisha. I got out of prison a couple of weeks ago. And one of the biggest things I'm excited about being out, hold on a minute, of being out of church, I mean, to be out of prison, is to be able to go back to church again. And then before I can get out of the door to shake hands, I get somebody to tell me, I'm glad that you came to church and visited us, but we have a few people in the church who feel uncomfortable with you being here. You haven't asked me why I went to prison. You don't know why I went to prison. And these are Black people. These are people who are supposed to be welcoming. You feel like if you can't go anywhere else to get food, to get fed, to get clothes, to get spiritually fed, it should be a church, right? And then to leave Macon after being put out of that church to come to Columbus and be told not in another church, but a second church. I was like, I'm done. So we wonder why people are leaving the churches in droves. And I was just like, I'm done. Because if this is supposed to be a reflection of God, I don't want, this is not what I want. So yeah, I didn't go to church for a long time. But then to think that I've been in prison for this extended amount of time, and you've been coming every Sunday. We come out of our pods, you come and tell us what you want to tell us on Sunday, but you ain't there to meet me when I got released. You ain't said, hey, we know you're getting, I've been talking to you this entire time you've been in prison. How is it that you do a prison ministry with people? See the same people for years and years at a time, and you're not the first face they see when they get out. You're not the first person to say, well, look, we glad you home. Come to church, service start at 11. We're going to cook, we're going to do this, and we're going to welcome you home, and we're going to do what we need to do to help you get back on your feet. But instead, we met with closed doors. And Doc shared this flyer on Twitter that said, I think Doc said something about when people are questioning about reopening the church, whether they should be going back to church when the church is reopened. The church has never been open for a lot of us. And people think folks are not being put out of churches. They are. They're running background checks and telling folks they can't come to church. Not even just folks on registries, because you have a violent charge. And who doesn't have a son or a grandson or somebody who hasn't been to prison? Half the folks in the church got somebody they know them been to prison. And this is why churches aren't growing, because we want the same 14 or 15 church mothers in the church. Ain't no young folks in the church. And if they are, they sleep half the time because the church is not growing. How are you sitting in the middle of a project having a church, but you ain't out here going over across the street in the hood, talking to the folks, trying to get them to church? How you not going? I know a lady been coming to church for 2 years and her husband getting out of prison, and you not ministering to her and her husband to help them with what they need. So I just wanted to, I know I got off on a tangent, and but it bothers me because when I talk to my grandma about it all the time, she said, baby, you just have to know that we human too. And even though we say we pastors and we preachers and we people of God and we people of faith, we have our problems too. But we need to really, really work on what we're doing, because folks is looking at us. And we say we're a person of faith, they're expecting us to walk that walk. They're expecting us to put whatever faith that we are, they're expecting us to put that in action. Because as soon as we don't, they're not going to say, Walisha did this, or Harold did this. They're going to say that Christian did that, or that Muslim did that, or that person that's Jewish, they did that. They're going to remember what you're doing. And to me, I don't think it's pleasing to whoever it is that we serve to be putting people out of prison. I mean, out of places of worship. So my question to you, Harold, is, like I said, a recent study was done that 80% of faith leaders said they would welcome people who had sex offenses, but they just don't know how and how to protect the congregation at the same time. Harold, why would any place that is supposed to be a safe haven and place to come to for redemption and inclusion exclude anybody? And what resources or possible solutions, such as toolkits or education, is available for those on the line who do leave places of worship what can you suggest be implemented so that those places can be more inclusive to worshipers who are returning home from prison, and especially those who are on the registry?
Okay, thanks, and I appreciate your testimony, Wallace. I am so not used to you calling me Harold, but that's okay.
Doc.
But it is my name, so I do answer to it. I'm learning to answer to it more and more. But thanks for having me on here. I did not go through what you went through, and I'll tell you why. And I'll use this as a springboard into answering your question. The church I attended when I was incarcerated, Praise and Glory Tabernacle Family Worship Center in Southwest Philadelphia, has a process in place for people who get arrested. You get arrested in our church, whatever the charge is, or when you tell the pastor what happened, or if you're detained on bail, right, then somebody from your family goes and tells the pastor what happened. So I went and I told my pastor what happened. And then he prayed with me, and then he took me in front of the congregation. And then I explained to the congregation what happened. I took responsibility for what I had done wrong. And then one of the things that our church that you have to do is not only take responsibility, but then you challenge the young people to make a decision different than the one you made. You know, poor choice, this is the right choice. Young people, here's how you can make the right choice. Once you've done that, the whole church comes forward and prays for you, right? So my entire church came up and prayed for me. And after the prayer was over, my pastor went to the bulletin board. And on the bulletin board, he posted my name, the name of my judge, and the name and address of my defense attorney. And everyone in the church who wanted to could then write a letter to my judge, care of my defense attorney, to be read at my trial and sentencing. We do that for every member, no matter what the charge. And then the pastor and members showed up at my trial. And the judge had the stack of letters. He was so freaked out by the stack of letters that he called a recess to go back and read every single letter. He then came out and read the letters into the record and then gave me the lightest sentence he could under the law. When I came home, right, and of course people wrote me while I was gone. They stayed in touch with me while I was gone. When I came home, that very first Sunday, they gave me a reception after church. Okay, and that's standard in my church. And one of the things that does at Praise and Glory Tabernacle is it destigmatizes behavior, because all of us make mistakes. We talk about sex offenders, right? Or people, I like, you know, person-centered language, people who have been convicted of sex offenses. I've done a number of work with New Persons Ministries in Reading, Pennsylvania, which is a halfway house for people coming home who have sex offenses. I learned a lot from them. And one of the things I learned from them was that the author of one of the most famous poems ever written, right? The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. I almost said, the Lord is my shepherd, I see what I want. That's really what David was saying, right? When he saw Bathsheba. But that was a sexual harassment. That was a rape. That was a Me Too moment when David took Bathsheba. She couldn't say no, he was the king. So we recite the words of a sex offender in church. And so you might as well take the 23rd Psalm, not half the book of Psalms out, if in fact they're not welcome. So what's going on? And the rabbi already alluded to it, Billy alluded to it, Bill Paul alluded to it, changing the narrative, right? Developing a different narrative that puts people first and doesn't define them in light of their mistake, in light of their sin. Jesus doesn't do that. Jesus looks at Peter and calls him a rock. He could have called him a lot of things, right? But he looks at him in terms of what the Judeo-Christian tradition calls the image of God, the Imago Dei, shifting the narrative. Now, what can churches do? What can houses of worship do? Synagogues and mosques? Well, one thing, Walisa, you've already put up in the chat links to guidelines for churches that want to, congregations that want to embrace people who have sex offenses. And I think that there are two things that are really critical in the links that you have here and in the attitude of congregations. One is that we have to have compassion, right? And that's critical. The other, and I may get in trouble for saying this, but as a recovering alcoholic, I'm going to say it because I know it's true for me. Those of us who, and my incarceration was a direct result of my alcoholism, okay? Those of us who have been convicted of crimes have to be willing to be accountable. And sometimes accountability means earning trust. And so part of what it meant for me to earn trust, right? When I was released from jail, part of what I had to do was to earn the trust of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania before they would let me drive again. And what they did was they gave me this driver's license. I carry it with me when I use it when I do workshops. If you can see all of if you see all the red on the side here and down here, this is a limited license. It says you can only drive a car that has an alcohol detection system on it. And so I had to be accountable and regain the trust that enabled me to finally get a regular license. And those of us that are coming home from prison, if we have whatever the charge is, there's a certain amount of distrust that people have, and we have to be willing to let people walk along with us. I don't walk right back in the same way I came out. There's got to be a set of accountability. And so part of what people need to be trained in is how to give loving accountability, right? Not punitive accountability, not stigmatizing accountability, but loving accountability to someone to help them make the transition back. And so I don't have a problem asking a person who has been convicted of a sex offense to not be unaccompanied when they go to the bathroom or when they move around the church. I don't have a problem with that because that individual is submitting to it as a loving accountability and knows that I have her or his best interests at heart. I think that, you know, there are ways that we can do that, and there are guidelines that are available. And Walisha, you've put several of them up here in the chat room that we can all make ourselves available of. When we train churches and healing communities, and that's what we do, that's what Joanne Cash Owens does, that's what I do, other people in our organization, we train congregations, and this is in response to one of the chat rooms that says, is anybody going to talk about help? We train congregations to build stigma-free churches that help them embrace people coming home by starting with the family left behind. It's one thing to say, I don't want those people in my church. It's another thing if those people have a mother sitting next to me every Sunday. I'm not going to look in that woman's face and say, I don't want your son here. In fact, it's a doorway, it's an on-ramp to compassion to know that that guy, that criminal, right? That's the stigma, has a mother who's sitting next to me weeping and crying because her son is lost. Psychologists call that disenfranchised grief, the sense of loss that a person has when no one is crediting it, no one is recognizing it, no one is validating it, right? So that when you have a loss to death, congregations validate that. It's called a funeral. It's called a viewing. It's called a wake. We have rituals of validation for the grief of death. We have nothing for the grief of loss of a child to the criminal justice system. And so we have to create ways. That's what my congregation in Philadelphia did. They had created ways of dealing with the rituals of loss so that everybody moving through the system feels connected. Everybody moving through the system, anybody and their family members feel connected in ways that their sense of loss is credited. So we want to remove the stigma. We want to remove the shame. And I'll just say one more thing real quickly. I gave my number, my prison number, on purpose. I do that every time I preach. After I get the big introduction and the degrees and all the yada, 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 he taught at Yale. Well, I went from Yale to jail, okay? And so I give my inmate number, my prison number, specifically as a way of trying to create space for people to say it's okay to self-disclose, you will be loved. And with pastor's permission, and I recommend those of you that are in pastoral leadership positions, whatever your tradition, one of the things I recommend is setting aside a time on a regular basis to ask people to come forward whose family is impacted by mass incarceration to come forward for prayer, to self-identify. I've been doing this for 15 years. I've never had an empty altar, asking families of the incarcerated to come forward for prayer. 15 years. The smallest number that has ever come forward is 9. And that was in a church that had 12 people. Largest number was 400 at a mega church in Baltimore, Maryland. And I would say to that mega church that dismissed that gentleman, if they did an altar call for families of the incarcerated, that probably half their church would come forward. And people would come to understand that this is not a matter, I love the way that Billiana put it, he talked about othering. This is not a matter of us versus them. The number of people who've moved through this criminal justice system in this country is so great, it is virtually impossible for any church to not have a single person who's been in prison, in jail, under some kind of supervision, or having a close family member in that. When I got locked up, promise, last story, when I got locked up, I don't want anybody to know that the preacher was locked up. And I went incognito, got my nickname, Doc, right? You know, that way nobody, everyone in jail, prison has a nickname. I was there 2 weeks. Dude comes up and he says, Pastor, what are you doing in here? And I'm like, I don't know you, who are you? He says, my name's Tyrell. I said, I don't know anybody, Tyrell. Do I look like I know somebody named Tyrell? Nobody my age knows anybody named Tyrell. He said, I used to play drums in your church. And then he called his mother's name. His mother was on my staff. I was outed. But you know what? Tyrell told me that there were other people from our church there. And before I left that unit, I met 7 men who were members of the church I used to pastor. Now, as a pastor, we had a prison ministry. But we never connected with our own folks
Yeah.
that were in the system. That's like a congregation saying, instead of visiting the sick, we're going to show up at the hospital once a month and do a service. So it's humanizing the issue, connecting with the issue, and recognizing that this is not, as Billiana said, this is not us and them. It's us. And the stories of incarcerated men and women, including people who've been convicted of sex offenses, are in our church Sunday after Sunday. And if they're not in our church, they're in our book.
Thank you, Doc. I sure appreciate that. So right now we are at our Q&A part. Do we have a question? We had one question that was submitted through registration. But is there anybody on the line that has a question that you'd like to address to anybody? Are they able to take, if you are able to take yourself off mute, do that. If not, I'll answer this question that came in on the form until you get thinking about it, get warmed up on it. Okay, the question that did come in said, how does God's justice relate to restorative justice? Why are we not supposed to do what the Bible says? I emailed it back and said, because the Bible contradicted. One minute it say, cut your hand off, and you know what I'm saying, it's contradictory. But you know, I'm not a Bible scholar. So would anybody like to chime in on that question? How does God's justice relate to restorative justice, and why are we not doing what the Bible says when it comes to justice?
But let me say something real quick, Walisa. I'm gonna get out the way. The reason those laws are in the Hebrew scripture, and Rabbi, if I'm wrong, just jump in. The reason that the retaliatory laws are in the Hebrew scriptures are not to be not to inflict punishment, but to limit punishment.
Okay.
If there is going to be accountability, it's got to be proportional. So that what we've done is we've taken this punishment narrative that Billiana talked about, and we've expanded it and said, well, the Bible says an eye for an eye, so we got to take an eye for an eye, and we've turned it into revenge. That was basically to tell people, look, if one person takes an eye, you can't take 2. The idea was to limit punishment, not to inflict it. So that's one quick response to, you know, what we've done with passages that were supposed to place limits and what the legal system calls proportionality on a situation, and reconfigured it in light of our narrative of revenge. That's one response.
All righty. Well, thank you. Would anybody like to chime in on that? Would anybody else like to chime in on that question? Pastor Lydia, since he put you on the mark, or Billy?
Go ahead, Billy.
No, this is definitely a rabbi question. So I'm gonna leave the book to her, but I'm gonna say this. Apart from that, when we close whatever our holy book is, whether it's the Bible, whether it's the Quran, the Tao Te Ching, I don't care what it is. When we close it, we have not closed the mouth of God. There is a progressive, at least we have to accept there's a progressive revelation that continues to speak in our times that may be leading us to do the things that we're talking about today, even if you find them contradictory to what you may read in a book. But I think I just wanted to say that a lot of what we're going to have to do here has to be premised on the living epistle, right? That is all of us, right? And the ways in which we choose to be and live and exist in the world. But I'll let the rabbi help us with the scriptures.
I mean, honestly, I was going to say something really similar. We see there's a lot of ways to relate to that book, but I think the most honest way is to see it as a mirror, and it reflects all parts of what it is to be a human and experience this humanity, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And it's up to us to decide how we want to then live that out. What are the parts we want to highlight? What are the parts that feel most life-giving? God gave us freedom of choice, gave us all the possibilities, and then gave us the freedom of choice. And so we get to decide what is the most righteous and holy on some levels. And, you know, I think there's the written, what we understand is the written law. And in Judaism, we call the oral tradition. And the power of the oral tradition, which is encased in what we call the Talmud now, is that it records all of the arguments for every question, both the part that actually gets accepted and also the minority opinion. And the reason for that is that our ancient brothers and sisters lived in a different context. They lived in a different time, and they wanted to leave open the possibility that today we might find even a third answer, a fourth answer that might be right for us now. And so they say in the Talmud, you know, have a heart of many rooms. Have a heart of many rooms. Hold open lots of possibilities, even the ones that you don't know yet know, and live into what we believe God is calling us to in our highest and best selves.
Thank you so much, Lydia. We have a question from Shantae, and then we have a question from Katrina. And before we get off, we had another question that came in regarding why can we not, as a church, exclude people who what? So either probably Bill or somebody else can answer that question, but just to be, so you can go ahead and be prepared for that question. Why, as a leader in my church, why can I not just automatically exclude people who are sex offenders to avoid any type of liability down the line? So just be prepared to answer that question. Okay, Shantae, you have the floor for your question.
Okay, so I lived and worked at a transitional housing program in which we were required to go to church. And so I think we had about 30 sex offenders there. And like, my charge wasn't sex as a sex offender, but it's like in disclosing whatever the charge is, like when you go to church, if you're living in an environment in which you're reliving your charge every day, not disclosing, I feel like it should be an option as well. And you should be able to worship, because it's like with my story, they did a video and put it on display on all of the screens and gave the executive director a $10,000 check. And then after that, everyone in the congregation only related to me as my story. So when we're having sex offenders who are disclosing, and now you have people who are shying away, it's like, where do you get that place of reprieve? So it's not directed at anyone individually, but I'd like someone to answer it. Like, how do you practice creating a safe space for people who have charges or who experience being impacted by mass incarceration without the bias?
Anybody like to chime in on that?
I think one thing that we're forgetting here, you know, God gave us authority over a lot of things. Jesus, you know, in the Bible, it speaks, you know, how we've gotten authority over, you know, in the beginning, you know, the plants, the land, you know, to cast out demons and heal the sick. He gave us authority over a lot of things. But one thing that I think we as a people forget, God never gave us authority to change another person. That is in his hands. And we have to be the ones to move out the way and let God be God. If you're uncomfortable as an individual with something, then you have that ability to remove yourself. But to sit there and then ban or close your heart up to seeing a person as a person, then just be prepared, you know, to, if God treated us the way how we look at other people, that doesn't mean that we have to like what they've done. That doesn't mean we have to agree with who they are. But it is not up to us to sit back and judge and want to oust out a person. Because I know for myself, and I can truly say, God, in my prison sentence, who I am today is not who I was even yesterday. Because God is he grows us, he builds us every day when we open our hearts. So for us to sit up there and look down on other people, you know, it's not right, it's not of God. The second greatest commandment is to love our brothers. It doesn't say with conditions, it just says to love. And if we can't walk in that love, that's what God looks at, is our heart. That doesn't mean we have to like what a person does. It just means to treat that person with love. You don't have to be at their house. You ain't got to be holding hands with them, but you still walk in love regardless. God never gave us the authority to change anyone. We allow God to work through us. And if we allow God to work through us, that means we walk in love, because as it says in John, God is love. And that's just the bottom line of it. You may feel what you feel, and that's fine. Nobody's trying to take that away from you. But to sit there and look down and want to prevent somebody from God, from their worship, from their hearts opening up to being a whole person, it's like, how dare we? It's okay for you to mess up. And I'm speaking from experience myself. These are some things that I had to tell myself. It's okay for God to change you, but it's not okay for God to change someone else. I mean, how do you, you know, how can you sit up there and try to justify that? You can't. Because God doesn't love one of us more than he loves the other. He loves us all unconditionally.
Yes, he does.
So are you what you have in times like this, you know, that you have to say, and are you so we're not, in the Bible says we're not supposed to look at ourselves more highly than others. Again, no conditions attached to that. And
Thank
that's
you.
what if you regard, and the same thing with the rabbis say, a lot of people that look at the Bible and everything, they have to, the Bible is not written in America. You know, so there's a lot of culture things, a lot of ways of life that we can't even think about or wrap our heads around, but it was not written in our culture. And we have to understand that as well going forward. But I'm just saying, I mean, I don't like a lot of stuff that happens, but I try to remind myself every day that how would I feel if God turned his hand away from me? To me, that feeling, I don't ever want to even fathom that feeling. And there's other people that have distorted past, that made bad decisions, that may feel the same way too. No one is better than the other. And we have to just do that walk in love, no matter what. If you allow God to use you and open your heart, that means there's no more of you. It's all of him
Thank you
working
so
in and
much.
through you.
Thank you so much, Katrina. I mean, I can hear the passion in your voice, so I really appreciate that. We have one question from Antonio, but I want to make sure that Shantae's answer did get question. I saw Lydia chimed in. I think Shantae had a question regarding what do we do about the societal and the stigmas that's associated with it. And I think that also was with the same question, because I've read several toolkits that say when you get somebody that come into the church and they have a record, they should be taken into a meeting where you automatically need to get their background check. You need to ask for the name of their PO or their probation officer. You need to find out the judge and get their sentencing. I just feel like, to me, that's a lot. I feel like that's, to me, and I think a lot of time when people pull background checks, they're not really pulling to feel safe. They're pulling to be nosy. And some of the biggest gossipers are in the church. And so I personally feel, I would feel uncomfortable asking somebody going in detail. Now, I'm not so to the point in vain that I do understand that some folks on the registry need a little bit more intense help and therapy than other folks. So I'm not opposed to asking a person, because you do want to know if a person raped 9 or 10 4 and 5 year old little boys, or did they get placed on the registry because they were 17 years old and they had a 15-year-old girlfriend and they still married 20 years later. Yes, those people are still on the registry. I have a woman on the registry, right? 2 or 3 women on the registry right now who are on the registry because they were working 2 and 3.5 jobs and their children were being molested at home. And the judge said, no, there's no way you didn't know about it, and then slapped them on the registry. I got a woman that's on the registry right now because she decided to go in her backyard, her fenced-in backyard, topless to sunbathe, and because there's a nosy little boy next door who happened to see her from their 3rd floor house upstairs, she's been placed on the registry. People are being placed on the registry for things that have no reason why they should even be on the registry. And if truth be told, half our mamas and our daddies and our granddaddies will be on the registry, because half of them was 18 and 25 when they married 16 and 17-year-old girls. Because back then, that's what you did. You dated men who were older, who could give you a life of security. My grandma got married when she was 15. You know, to a 20-something-year-old man, and they stayed married 60, 70 years. So I would feel uncomfortable to a point of being nosy, especially when you're talking about, I mean, I don't care if a person killed somebody at 16 or 17. If they've been in prison 20 years, or they've been out 10 years, at some point and they've stayed out of trouble, apparently they're not too much of a thing. I feel like if you're not in the church and you're not working with children, you're not working with nobody's money, you're not volunteering in no classrooms, you do not need to have a background check or financial check pulled, period. And until somebody shows you, you know what I'm saying? But if somebody comes in and you know, and you feel like, okay, you, like Bill said, right now with Restore Georgia, we're actually advocating for somebody who has got put out of a Gwinnett County megachurch because he's on the registry. This is somebody who's been going to that church for years, paid tithes, paid offerings. And the church is not willing to work with us at all. The church is not willing to, we don't want him here, period. He can join via online, but we don't want him here. Well, why don't you give him all his money he done paid to the church for the past 6 years? But you ain't gonna do that though, right? You know, so what do we do when we're talking about social stigmas in education? Because everybody's lumping folks in the same, in the same things. At our next board meeting, that is something that I've already spoken, that this is something that we're going to probably talk about doing, educating folks on what needs to be done, especially when you're dealing with folks that's coming home, because you got to also think about it. Their family members are in your church. So you putting them out, you got to put them out as well. So we're going to take these last 2 questions and then we're going to end so we can be respectful of folks' time. The first hand we saw was somebody with A. And is it Antonia? And then is it, what was it, Antonia? Antiana. All right, there you go, Antiana.
Yes. I was going to say Mr. Bill could go because mine was more of a comment than a question. And I know like he was, so he can go first and then, yeah.
Okay, Bill, so can you answer that question? I think the question that they had asked, submitted earlier, wanted to know that if the church wanted to, they would feel more comfortable if they completely excluded 100% anybody that comes in on the sex offender registry. And I think this is the same person that eventually we had been talking back and forth. They didn't show up today, but they submitted a question. They use visitation cards to pull people's background check. They literally pull background checks. And so they use the visitation cards or your first time visitor card. Now it makes me not even go to a church no more and do a first time visitor card. But I don't even have a record no more, but that shouldn't be a reason why you don't want to do a first time visitor card. What do you say about them when they say, well, to feel like it's better to prevent any type of liability, isn't it safer to just exclude anybody on the registry just to be safe?
There's this book that I need to be reading, but Alicia, you covered it pretty well. They're trying to put everybody into one basket, consider them because they're all the same, and they're not. And there needs to be conversation, I think, with the individual involved and also with the leadership of that church. There should be no exclusion for anyone. Christ's word tells us to forgive throughout everywhere you look in the Bible. It talks about forgiveness and compassion and not casting the first stone. And I think that is very applicable there. If people would understand what people who are on the registry, why they're on the registry, and what they're going through in their life, and you talk about a group of people that need help and need assistance and need support, it's people coming off the registry. These are good people. Most cases are good people. They're not evil people. And there's 25 different crimes that get people on the registry, including urinating in public, or as you mentioned, a Romeo Juliet kind of a situation where it's an underage girl and a teenage boy. I had a fellow the other day I talked to living in Montgomery, Alabama, been married for 15 years. He gets to go home during the day and see his wife and his kids, but at night he's got to sleep under a bridge because of residency restriction. He's not allowed to be in his home at the evening because it's too close to the school. That's the type of thing that these people are putting up with. We need compassion. We do not need to be chastising every individual who's on the registry.
Thank you so much. And Rabbi Lydia has to leave real quick. Did anybody out of Antonia, and the last question was Shantae, was anybody have a question that's going to be directed to Rabbi Lydia? All right. All right. Thank you so much, Rabbi Lydia. And we're going to get ready and wrap it up. Go ahead on, Antiana, with your question, and Shantae, then we're going to close it out.
Thank you. I just wanted to just say a quick comment, just like say how much I really enjoyed this discussion. And I know Miss Walisha said something earlier about like young people in church. And I feel like I'm a young person in church and I love church and I want to be able to do God's work for God's people. I am entering in my last year of law school, and I'm really hoping to come out and really just love on God's people. I believe in loving through grace, and God's never turned his back on me and my mistakes. So I feel like I can never turn my back on anyone. And so I just wanted to say how much I really appreciate this discussion, and thank you, Ms. Walisha, for inviting me.
Thank you so much. All right, Shantae, you get ready to take it out. Who's your question directed to? Shantae, you there? Okay, I think Shantae's gone. Did anybody have a question before we get ready and get off? Tony's dropping some good nuggets in the chat. Tony, you need to come on off now. Don't be like that. Faith institutions need to host all kinds of educational sessions about social justice issues, showing documentaries and other things that teach more. And that's one of the questions that, we asked Billy earlier. Back in the day, the church, everything from voting, whether it's voting, mass incarceration, solitary confinement, churches was, they be on it. And now when we see churches now, I've known people to get put out of church because you ain't paying your tithes. Like, you ain't paid no tithes in a year, you got to go. So it's like, boom, it's business. So I don't understand it, what we need to do, but I'm going to figure something out, because I'm always trying to do something. But educating in the churches of what can be done, I think is key in getting it done. This is good, having people come on these virtual sessions, but I think some in person, and actually we're going to be having the End Mass Incarceration Conference next year in 2022. Ebenezer hosted it last year. Michelle Alexander, Doc has been at one. I have been invited to be one of the co-chairs for that national conference. So we're going to be working on that. And I think one of the biggest things is to talk about educating in the churches, because a lot of times, the churches in some places, especially in Black churches, there are things we just don't talk about. We don't want to talk about homosexuality. We want to talk about mental health. We don't want to talk about depression. We want to talk about drugs. We want to talk about nothing but Jesus and having something done. But it's stuff that's causing, I mean, it's causing some real issues if you really think about it. Like Doc said, if you ask people in that church who's been impacted by somebody that's been to prison, half everybody would get up. And so to be able to exclude people or not have that talk, or to have prison ministries and not doing anything beyond a prison ministry, to me is not doing kingdom work. And I think that's what it all should be about, doing kingdom work. To say, oh yeah, we do a clothing closet, yeah, we do a food closet, yeah, we do a jail ministry, but you can't tell, you've been going to prison ministry for 5 years and you can't name 5 other folks you've been ministering to in prison. That's a problem. But yet you ain't had no new members actually doing no new member classes in 10 years. And then be sitting and complaining. That's a lot of questions I get when I do I actually do new member training sometimes with churches. I facilitate that with them. And they'll say, well, what can we do to make our church grow? And I'm saying, well, how long did you ain't you had a prison ministry for 15 years? And they'll say, yeah. And you mean to tell me out of them 500 folks that have been got out of prison over them 5 years or 15 years, where them 500 people at? Well, I'm talking about we need some, no, those are members. Those are potential members. Those are people that if you're ministering them for 10 years and 15 years in prison, they probably done told you their mama done died. They done told you who's sick in their family. They done told you how they having a hard time going through stuff. But I'm sure they got skills. Some of them are jailhouse lawyers. Some of them done got accounting skills. You ain't here worried about why you can't pay a public bookkeeper. Why you ain't looking at the guy that's coming out of jail? You know, check and see if you got fraud. You know what I'm saying? Utilize what you're doing. They can be used, we can be used in so many ways, but if you would just give people an opportunity. But I think this is definitely a conversation that is going to continue. It's going to be something that we're going to have at a later thing. And we're definitely going to work on tackling this, people doing background checks in churches. I know they do it for certain things, but now it's gone to the point where people are actually using it to exclude people out of church. And I'm not the only person who knows about it. Other folks do know about it. And it's going to definitely be an issue that, to me, it creates a problem. And I want us to be able to engage on that sometimes later. I want to go ahead and be very respectful of folks' time. We're 5 minutes over, but I really appreciate the panelists via Paul and Billy Honor and Rabbi Lydia, Doc. Tony's finally come off camera, so that's good. And everybody who joined. And I really, really appreciate you all for supporting New Life Second Chance outreach this entire month for Reentry Awareness Month. We're new to Atlanta. We've only been here a year, but we're aiming to actually do what we've been doing for the last 5-6 years, but only in person. So we just got to find some space to get that done. I think we do great work, considering none of us are paid for the work that we do, but it's going to come. We want space. We want housing to provide for people. We want to provide education to churches. We want to provide education to employers and housing providers. And all the information that you all have been dropping in chat, and Tony showed enough been hitting it. All of that stuff will be considered. All this stuff will be emailed to you if you would like to before you leave, just to make sure that I have your emails. You want to drop your email in the chat, we can make sure you get all this information. And I may actually probably do a little work. Now I ain't working on Sunday. I said I won't never work on Sunday no more. God got on me about that. So I'm gonna try to get it done by Saturday. But other than that, you all are free to leave. Thank you so very much. Doc, I really appreciate you. Hey, Tammy, I appreciate you for coming. So I'll make sure you're not Harry, you're not Doc. You're doing good because you remember your GDC number. I don't even remember mine. But yeah, that just hurt me. And I hate y'all had to apologize because I did not mean to break down on camera. But I'm gonna stop there. Yes, thank you all so very much. And if you have any questions about the work that we do, it's on my screen behind me. We are at New Life Second Chance Outreach, and we assist individuals who are directly impacted with finding the resources that they need. Several of you probably do get our emails. Andrea, can you put our link back in the chat again? If you work with individuals who are returning home from prison and you need resources for them, please complete the client email and request to be added to our list so you can receive those resources. And just go to applications or referrals. If you're a client, meaning you got a record, complete the client application. If you are a provider or a family member, then complete that second application. All these resources about also, even though we didn't drop them in the chat, we will also be sending you links on how to connect with multi-faith based organizations here in Georgia as well as Alabama. There's one in Alabama called Faith in Action Alabama. Georgia has the EMI Georgia Network. So that I'll make sure I send all of that stuff as well. There's a Flock, which is Faith Leaders of Color. That if you are a person of color, we want to invite you out to those and connect you with those things. But definitely, thank you all so very much for joining us. And you are free to leave. God bless y'all, and be kind and be nice, and be sure to carry on educational when you're seeing people. That one person that's coming in and they looking a little scared when they come to the door, just think they might have just got out of prison and probably done been put out a couple churches before, and now they hesitating on whether they should walk through the door or not. Be the one to get up and say, come on in. All righty. Y'all have a great one, and thank you so very much. Oh, Lord. You can stay on, Doc, and you ain't got nothing to do. I want to talk about a toolkit.
Oh,
Bill,
okay.
you got 5 minutes?
Absolutely.
Okay. And Joanne, I think she's with you as well. Andrea, if you want to stay, you can. I want to really talk about this toolkit. Let me stop this.